Okay. So, can we, bring in some playfulness into our lives and embrace, this idea that that sex can be a game and that intimacy can be a game. And so like one of the things is, do you want to sneak away early tonight? Right? Or I had one couple one time where they changed the time on the clocks in the house so that the kids went to bed like 15 minutes earlier.
That's amazing.
If you walk up to your partner and you're like, "I think you are dangerously attractive in sweatpants."
Mhm.
And they may turn to you and be like, "What?" But if you say it with a smile in your voice and a smile on your face, like not taking it too seriously, that could be something that, I don't know, becomes playful. Welcome to The Intimate Philosopher, where philosophy meets intimacy and life's biggest questions finally feel at home. I'm Dr. Emma Smith. I'm a licensed professional counselor, certified sex therapist, and existential philosophy nerd, inviting you to join me for an after hours conversation. This is a space to slow down, pour a glass of wine, or maybe a cup of tea, and explore the messy, beautiful intersections of meaning, connection, desire, and being fully human. This is the place for real conversations about the parts of life that don't fit neatly into a box. So, grab your glass, get comfy, and let's dive in. Hi, friends, and welcome back to another episode of The Intimate Philosopher. I am very excited to be back here this week with my favorite co host in the entire world, Dr. Alivia Stehlik.
Happy to be here.
And today we're going to do something that is a little bit different because uh, content calendars mean nothing to me, apparently. This is one of those where we had something scheduled and then something in real life happened. And I went, oh, no, 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 we actually need to talk about this instead. So if you are listening to this and if I have referenced something else that was coming up, I'm sorry, we're bumping everything. I don't think there was anything, but um, this is what we're doing today. So we're just gonna go with it. And yeah. So the last couple Fridays, I have been doing this thing called the relational shift sessions. And these have been these little Friday drop-ins where we are talking about different aspects of relationships. And specifically, a lot of people will say every couple's issue is a communication issue, or most couples' issues are communication issues. And I wanted to play around with that because I think that can be true and it often is true, but I also think it can go a little bit deeper. So for the last 3 Fridays, I have been doing these relational shift sessions to help couples get unstuck, particularly around sex and intimacy and around this idea that sometimes we can love one another deeply and build these beautiful lives together and be really close friends and still not know how to talk about sex and desire and trying to be close but not wanting to pressure our partner and and doing that all in the backdrop of real life, like whatever is going on inside your four walls of your home and in your context, and then also with the world kind of writ large of like, what you saw on Instagram when you opened it up, or what headline you happened to read in between walking the dog and preparing dinner and that kind of stuff. So we wanted to kind of create these drop-ins, and what ended up happening was, I think, a couple things. One was that people gave me some really great feedback, and I think one of the most meaningful comments that I received was I didn't expect to laugh as much and have as much fun in this session as I did. And I thought
Mm.
that was great. Yeah, I thought that was so lovely. And I had people who came to almost everyone. Like, I think there was a couple of people who made it to 2 out of 3, and for something that was just kind of, a good idea fairy drop-in, that was really meaningful. Like, very little notice. "Hey, I'm just gonna do these because I want to, and people gave up an hour in the middle of their day to come invest in learning how to communicate better in their relationships, and I thought that was so cool. However, we didn't get to everything. We barely even scratched the surface, but there was one thing that I really wish that we had gotten to, and because we didn't, I had made up a little worksheet, if you will, or like handout. My former high school English teacher side is coming out full force in this one. But also, I wanted to explain it and I wanted to share it a little bit more in depth. So that way, more people could benefit from it because it really is one of those foundational things. And we're going to tie it to intimacy and desire because that's what we do here. And also, it can be used and adapted for just about anything. So, what we're going to talk about are bids for connection.
And in this case, intimacy specifically.
Exactly. So, Olivia, you want to share what a bid for connection is?
Well, a bid for connection is really anything that you might do that is directed at your partner, or I suppose at anyone, but in this particular case, at your partner to try to connect, right? Maybe it's getting somebody's attention, but it's really about wanting to connect. And so there are these little things that we do that are bids for connection, that are a way for us to try to reach out to our partner at some point because we all want to connect with our partner.
Yeah. And one of the things that's so interesting about this comes directly from the Gottman Institute and their work. And I first learned about it back in 2013 ish in their book, The Relationship Cure, which I thought was so fascinating because we're going to apply it to intimate relationships. But the book, The Relationship Cure, was so fascinating because the first place I applied these principles was in a work context. And it had nothing to do with intimacy at all. It did have to do with this coworker who kept trying to get my attention. And it was happening at like the most inconvenient times. And when I read this book, I was like, I wonder. I mean, they say that this could be used for different relationships. So like, what would happen if I actually did that? And guess what? It worked. So we're gonna talk about it in this specific context, but also if we have some time at the end, I'll share that story so you have it for a different context as well.
I think that's a great plan because while I didn't know this, uh, it's relatively recent for me to know about this. I have looked back at other workplaces and found the same thing that, like, oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I have to start with an assumption here. And the assumption that was true for the people who came to this class, and I want you to have it. You don't have to stop listening if this isn't true for you right now. But I am framing this with this type of couple in mind. Okay. So the type of couple that I was talking to is a couple that truly loves one another. They co-parent well together. They are adept at logistically masterminding their life together and engineering that and making it run smoothly in terms of point A to point B and schedules and whatnot. But you've heard me say this before. All of that, the better you are in that, the less you may have in desire because you're so good at the logistical part, right? And so what we realized is that, these couples, they weren't struggling with intimacy because they didn't want each other again, but they were stuck in this rut because somewhere along the way, in particular, initiation of intimacy started to get really awkward and feel maybe like a performance or a test or just a surefire way to feel rejected, right?
Yeah, that can happen. And I think, one of the things that we talked about was there's this paradoxical thing that in some cases, the longer you've been with someone, the longer you've been together, potentially the more awkward it can get because you can get stuck in these patterns and you don't know how to get out, right? Like you have the kind of ways that you've done this. And if that has worked really well, then great. But in many cases, it hasn't. Or even if it has worked well in the past, it has stopped working well or stopped working at all. But then there's this, oh no, what do I do now? How do I relearn this with this person that I love?
Mhm. No, that's so true. That's so true. Yes. That was one of the best parts of the conversation I think that we had was this idea of, my gosh, like why is it the more I care about this person, the more I care what they think, the more I want to be a good partner to them, the more awkward I get? Like that feels that doesn't feel fair. That doesn't feel okay.
Yeah, somehow the stakes are higher when you've been together in some ways, right? Because you like don't want to do the things wrong. And if it's really early in a relationship, then in many ways the stakes are lower because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And you're like, ah, whatever.
Yeah,
But if you've been with someone for a decade, well, if you mess something up, you gotta wake up in the morning and look at them in the face again. And right, like you're not gonna live that down immediately. It's not gonna just go away.
exactly. Well, and one of the things that I think is so interesting is that people will think that successful initiations are about technique, right? This idea of like, well, I'm just not asking the right way. And I think in my work, one of the things I've come to really find and appreciate is that in almost anything related to sex and desire and closeness in long term relationships, it's almost rarely ever about technique. Like, you need technique, but more than anything, you need attunement and you need a way to be in touch with what you want and what you need and have a way to communicate that to your partner about what you want and you need and vice versa. But like I think if I don't know, I'm open to being wrong about this, but I don't think I've ever worked with a couple who had the attunement and had the communication and the self-awareness and the shared awareness and were just like in a tizzy because the technique was so awful they couldn't figure it out.
I think that matches what you have said to me in the past, that it's all about that attunement. Do you know what you want, right? Are you attuned to your own self and what you want and what you need? And are you attuned to what your partner wants and needs?
Okay, so let's jump in. And we have, what is it, like 5 or 6 different categories because, of course, I'm going to categorize things.
Well, before we do that, though, I think we have to talk about what happens when there's a bid for connection or a bid for intimacy, right? We have to talk about this. You can either turn towards that bid for connection, you can turn away from that bid for connection, or you can like kind of aggressively shut that bid for connection down. Do you want to give some examples of what that might look like?
Sure. So the first thing is that like a bid looks like, we have different phrases in our worlds for like a bid. So it can be extending an olive branch, right? That might be a bid for repair. In this case, I think in the book they talk about like having somebody hand you their ticket, like the old school like movie tickets, and you can either take that ticket or you can say no and wave off that ticket, or you can slap it out of their hand. Is kind
Yeah.
of the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what that looks like, and that's what the bid is. So turning towards, I think for in the lowest stakes version of it, turning towards might be actually physically turning your body and looking at your partner when they're talking to you,
Yeah. Responding.
right? And I think, turning away from could actually physically be turning away from. in the opposite direction or pretending you didn't hear them
Yeah.
or something like that. And then, the slap or the shutdown is when you like aggressively respond in a negative way.
Yeah, I
So,
can't believe you would think I would want that.
exactly. Exactly. So, okay, so I'm going to go through the first category and that those are emotional connection bids. And this is important for intimacy because what happens is these are the bids that open the door to closeness before anything physical is on the table, right? So this may be, I think a lot of times people set themselves up for rejection because they try to launch right into physical intimacy when their partner is completely absorbed in something else. Like, I think the example I kept using during the class was, your partner's doing the dishes, and guess what? They're like only really thinking about doing the dishes. And so if you come up behind them and start this, you know, physical and suggestive dance, they're going to be like, what are you doing? Like, I am just doing the dishes. I can't, I'm not even with you in this moment. And so these emotional connection bids are a way to kind of open the doorway and also give your partner a clue to where you might be at. So it can be something like, you know, I've missed you today, right? Or this week. It could be, um, you know, can I have a few minutes with you tonight? Just to talk. I don't want anything else, but just to connect. Or, I want to spend time with you. Just these little things. And in this, you have to be able to connect in ways that aren't just sexual, right? And so these types of emotional bids work because one, they reduce ambiguity and they also don't leave room for your partner to think that you're just after sex because nobody wants to just be desired for an end goal, right? That's how, we want you to have this experience of having, if you were going to have sex, having sex with your partner, not on your partner, right? Like
Yes, definitely that.
that. So this is why that works because they don't have to guess whether you just want them or you want something from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love those. They're so I mean, they're so emotional, right? Like they're very they feel very like cozy in some ways, this idea of just being close to your partner. Um, and I think the next category is really similar, but transitions into a physical space where, maybe it's not just about having time with your partner or talking with them, um, but having gentle physical contact where it's maybe a hand placed on their lower back, or it's a kiss that lingers just a little bit longer than normal. Maybe it's putting your arm around their waist or asking if you can hold them for a minute, right? It's these non-sexual or non-inherently sexual acts of touch that are still really about closeness and connectedness. And if you really want to get fancy, you can ask your partner, where do you wish or how do you wish I touched you more or differently? Like, how do you like to feel physically close to me?
And not just inside the bedroom. This
Right,
is
right. Yeah, this is like out in the rest of your house or the rest of the world. Or, maybe you don't like to be touched out in the rest of the world and you only want to be touched when you're at home, right? You don't want to hold hands out in the world. You don't want to hug your partner or kiss. And maybe that's important and you need to have a conversation about that. Or maybe it's not that way. But I think asking those questions can give you a sense of like, this is actually what my partner would like. And maybe you'll be surprised by that, even if you've been together for a long time, because sometimes in the beginning we were just like, that isn't my favorite thing, but my partner seems to do it. And so, like, that's fine. And then 10 years later, you're like, I don't actually like this. I don't know why I've been, putting up with this for this long. And to the person who's been doing it, they don't know that from the beginning, that wasn't really something that their partner didn't like, or that there wasn't something that they liked that much or at all, maybe. And so you can learn things even this late in a relationship. Decades in, you may find things that you didn't know.
Hopefully, actually.
That's the goal.
Right? That is the goal. And it's so funny. I'm listening to you talk. I'm like, oh, right. That's why initiation gets more awkward because people are more likely to tell you what they actually think and feel about something.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of, I think there's some middle space there to use the middle path that Lauren on our previous episode was talking about, if I can
Yeah.
borrow that language. I understand why we don't necessarily say 100% of the truth with people that we're dating early on because we're like, oh gosh, I really want this person to like me and I don't want to shut something down too fast. And I'm not saying that we should bring that into our relationship later on, but I think there is a piece of it where it's like, well, why weren't you saying that before? And a lot of times it was like, well, because I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want them to think I'm mean, or something like that. And it's like, well, maybe you should try not to hurt your partner's feelings now too. And figure out a way to say, I I understand what you're trying to do or something. And also this would work better for me.
Yeah. I think that's one of the things that you talk a lot about how none of us were ever taught any of this. And we weren't taught language around, oh, I don't actually really like being touched that way. I would prefer if you touched me this way, right? Like, I don't like hugging or kissing or whatever this way. I would prefer if you did it this way. We weren't taught to do that. And so we also weren't taught how to respond when somebody says that. I think that can feel very much like rejection or like I'm doing something wrong. And it's not that at all. It's this idea of embodying and owning what you want and what feels good and asking your partner to join you in that. I think when somebody says that, it's not you're doing it wrong. It's hey, join me in this other thing.
Yeah, that's so good. Join me in this other thing. I love that. And I think with practice and over time, that can get easier. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to number three. So, number three is playful and low pressure bids. So, I'm going to continue to argue that play is one of the most underused tools in long term relationships and that sex is play for adults. Right.
Yep, we love that.
Okay. So, can we, bring in some playfulness into our lives and embrace, this idea that that sex can be a game and that intimacy can be a game. So like one of the things is, do you want to sneak away early tonight? Right. Or I had one couple one time where they changed the time on the clocks in the house so that the kids went to bed like 15 minutes earlier.
That's amazing.
Right. Or, uh, you know, I think you are, if you walk up to your partner and you're like, I think you are dangerously attractive in sweatpants,
Mhm.
and they may turn to you and be like, what? But if you say it with a smile in your voice and a smile on your face, like not taking it too seriously, that could be something that I don't know, becomes playful. I love one of the biggest barriers to, I think, couples being able to experience intimacy as freely as they want is that they'll say, well, the kids. And I'm like, okay, well, what about, imagine that the two of you are interns. This was really helpful during COVID when everybody was working from home. And I said, well, imagine the two of you are interns at work, you know, and um, your kids are your like supervisors and bosses, right? But everybody knows this was one of my secret superpowers was to figure out when I worked in in the corporate world and in the kind of cubicle land world, I could always tell who had something going on with somebody else because here's what would happen. One person would get up and they would go to the copy machine. And then this other person who had just been saying that they had to be at their desk for something suddenly would get up and go to the copy machine, and like linger a little too long. Or these very strategically timed coffee breaks and like just these little passing moments. And so I am so proud of my professional body of work that has had a number of very well educated, very successful people making out in their pantries and bathrooms during their time at home because it was the one place they could get away from the kids for like 30 seconds. And so we just made it a game.
I love that. I think that's amazing. It's also what you do at the beginning of a relationship. Like, you do sneak away and you do say the ridiculous things, like, you look dangerously hot in sweatpants. And then on the other hand, right, like, the other partner doesn't shut that down. They don't be like, I don't look good in these sweatpants. Like, the point isn't whether you look good in the sweatpants or not. The point is that your partner's like, hey, right? Like, you want to do something? And so it's a like, at the beginning of a relationship, you're like, "Yeah." And so even if you know you look ridiculous in your sweatpants, like, you're still gonna be into that. And
Mhm.
so I think this is this turning towards if your partner does that now, pause for a second and realize, "Oh, this is my partner asking to connect. Like, this is my partner trying to connect with me."
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you have to immediately these people were not, going from the pantry to the bedroom. They were going from the pantry back to their meeting, right? Like, it's very low stakes, and really what this is trying to do is it's trying to bring more playfulness back into the relationship, and it's also trying to dissolve this, like, dutiful partner archetype that just kind of creeps in at some point in our long-term relationships. And anxiety is the number one killer of desire, but duty bound might be like the number two right behind it. Obligatory,
Yeah.
that feeling of obligation, right? Like, sex should not be anywhere near the feeling of like having to pay your like quarterly taxes.
Yeah, even if it's not that bad. Like, you could be enjoying something, and if I tell you it's something you have to do, immediately you'll hate it. Like, immediately you won't want to do it. If it becomes something that you have to do, it's like, "Oh, now I don't wanna do it." Like, you literally enjoyed doing that. You just were saying how much you liked doing that thing, and I'm like, "Now you have to do it." And you're like, "Nah, I never wanna do that. I don't like that."
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I think that brings us to our next set of bids, which are attunement based, which is this idea of like, I want to come closer to you in a way that feels good to you. Maybe not necessarily in the way that I'm thinking of that would feel good for me in this moment, but like, I want to come closer to you in a way that feels good to you. And really, that's all about questions, right? That's all about realizing that you might not know. And so you have to ask your partner what they want. Like, what kind of closeness sounds good tonight? Or would touch feel good? Or does that feel like too much right now? Or what kind of affection are you craving in this moment? Right? It's these ideas of by asking the question, it's clear that I'm trying to come closer to you. But by asking the question, it also opens up the space for you to say, oh, actually, I would like it like this.
Yeah. Yeah. When we were in this class on Friday, there was and this is actually really interesting. Throughout the 3 Fridays, there have actually been more men in my sessions than women, which I thought was fascinating, right? One of the things that nobody said, but I wanna say it here, is that this one can be really challenging for, I think, men in particular, maybe not only, but men in particular to kind of wrap their heads around because I think that in so many ways, like sex is the way that men are allowed to experience closeness and connection, right? And like there's a whole bigger podcast that we can do on that at some point. But this one I think it's almost intuitive and goes without saying for like lots of women, but for men it's like, well, what kind of closeness sounds good tonight? Sex. Sex sounds good tonight. And also, what kind of closeness is there other than sex? What are you talking about?
That's funny.
Right? And so sometimes it's widening the aperture of what is possible, right? So that you can experience more more being received and having your bids for connection accepted. But if if you're only ever offering one thing, then that's only going to fit in so many slots, right, over the course of a day, a week, a month, or even a year. So are there other places for this, that we can say, well, what about this, and not have it, and you can't treat it like a consolation prize either.
It's not. It's just different. It's a different experience altogether. We've had a whole long conversation around, what is the sex? Is it just the sex that's sex, or is everything sex? And I think that applies here where, if your definition of what sex is just, one specific thing, then like that's a pretty narrow window of being able to say, this is how I experience intimacy and closeness is this one specific thing. If you can broaden that aperture at all of a sudden, like the whole world becomes your playground.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I understand where this comes from, right? So when we talk about, the awkwardness of initiating intimacy, one of the things that comes up is that, we get our models for how to start and how to close the gap of intimacy from either like widely shared media, now social media. Um, I think, romance novels, erotica, and of course, porn. And what's really interesting about that is that a lot of times in like erotica, they actually make the scenes awkward, the initiation scenes awkward. This is fascinating when I was looking this up. And those books sell better because it's more believable than if they had this, beautiful narrative arc. And then in porn, what's really interesting is that they just cut, right? Like there's like a so as part of the SAR, the sexual attitudes readjustment, in order to become a sex therapist, they make you watch a lot of this kind of stuff. And so one of the things is that you realize, oh, weird, they have this kind of like flimsy narrative scene to put both people in a room together, and then it just cuts to halfway through, and so no wonder people are lost, you
Yeah.
know. And if you had if you were one of the 6 people I've ever met whose parents sat down and had an actual, like, science-based, non-shameful, sexual health conversation with you, I'm pretty sure that this wasn't part of the conversation.
No, that still doesn't cover this.
Mm-mm. No. So, just saying, I understand. You weren't prepared for this, you weren't trained for this, there's no internship that covers this.
No, that's why we're doing this now.
Exactly. Okay, so the last one is desire forward bids. So, what does that mean? Well, desire forward is probably the bids that most people would think of on their own without this list. And what they are, they're direct, but they're not demanding. And I think that's really important. So, it's, a clear and warm, like, I want you can let your partner relax because they don't have to dig through subtext to see what's actually going on, right? So, I want you, you turn me on, I'm feeling drawn to you, um, I'd love to touch you tonight or feel you tonight or something like that. Now, there is a reason why I put this last.
I'm glad you're saying this because I was just thinking it.
Well, you can say it then.
No, go for it.
Okay. So the reason I put this last is because without the other four, this one is the least likely to work if you are one of those people who is in a relationship that has been stuck in a rut and you have, had repeated rejection. You can't get on the same page with your partner or something like that because these without the context of other experiences where it's like, I just want to spend time with you. I want to be playful with you. I just kind of want to, hang out, maybe make out with you. And like, that's it. These can feel like homework assignments or another obligation on the to do list. And so that's why we put them last. They are there and you can use them in the context of all of the other ones.
Yeah. In fact, I think everybody wants the last ones too, right? Everybody wants to be wanted. They want to be the one that turns someone on. But also, for many people, there needs to be intimacy and emotional connection and physical connection outside of that. It can't just be that. And so, having all of that swirl together really matters and opens up the space for this direct approach to work really well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I just have to say, please notice that even in the direct approach, it was not, are we having sex or not tonight?
Ew. Nobody wants that. Don't do that.
Don't do that. Don't do that. If your partner asks you that, say no. Like,
Like,
say no.
if that's working well for you, like, please let us know. I would be very curious if that is working well for you.
I don't know. I mean, that one's right up there in like the Hall of Fame with you have 3 minutes. I know.
Also, ew.
Right, but I don't and in both those cases, like, I don't think people are necessarily trying to be ugly about it.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
think I think we are just at a loss culturally with how do we do this? And how do I ask for this very vulnerable thing with the least amount of personal risk? And you think about, like, how those 2 concepts don't go together. You can't be invulnerable and be naked with somebody.
Mm.
That doesn't work. And so that's why when people say these things like, "Are we having sex or not?" It it sounds weird because it's even the language is at odds with what you are asking to do.
Yeah, you can't have sex with a suit of armor on.
Correct. Yeah, right? Um, so, yeah. So those are our bids for connection, and those are the different categories. So, I'm glad that we got to do this.
I think it's great that we got to go through this, and hopefully, this is helpful for some of you out there. It can be awkward and it can be uncomfortable, and there are so many ways to turn towards each other. And so, I think I'd be curious to know like what works well for you, and whether that's something that we've talked about or something else. Because we like to bring these things back around, and we like to know what's working.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want to let me know, you can reach out to us a couple different ways. So, one is there is a link to a comments form in my show notes, and that'll take you to a Google form, and you can fill it out and say, whatever it is that you want to say. And that's been very, very helpful and has helped us kind of direct some of the next episodes of the show and where we're going. And the other way is to reach out on Instagram at the Intimate Philosopher Podcast or Emma Smith, PhD. And then finally, I'm kind of making this part up as I go with like these Friday sessions. And I think I have this idea that I want to do a bigger kind of like masterclass style event that is I always run out of time, and so I'm like, "No, it has to be multiple hours. I wanna make it super accessible to people who really want this information And so if you would like to be notified when that happens, it'll be sometime in like the next month or two. I have to get my act together, and the good idea fairy needs to hit me over the head a couple more times. But I know I'm committed to making this happen. And so if you would like to be notified, then I will put a link also in the show notes. It'll also be in a link in my bio that says sign up for the wait list for the masterclass, because once we get that, then I will invite you, and I even want to make it relevant to you. And so I'm going to ask you, what is your biggest barrier to having the sex life and the intimate life of your dreams? Like, what's the hang up? Because I'm committed to doing this, but I also want it to be useful for folks. So if that's you, get over to the show notes or get over into the link in my bio and then let me know. We'll go from there. So, yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Olivia Stehlik, for joining me once again on The Intimate Philosopher. And, you know, we'll just keep figuring out this messy business of being human one episode at a time. So I'll see you next time, friends. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining me for this after hours conversation. If something in today's episode made you pause, get curious, or see yourself a little more clearly, share it with a friend and keep that conversation going. Until next time, keep exploring that messy, beautiful space between meaning and being human. I'll see you next time.